Was ist eine realistische Einschätzung? Werden diese Gebiete von Zelensky zurückerobert?
Nein.
Warum?
Es gibt kein Szenario, kein militärisches Szenario, in dem die Ukraine diesen Krieg gewinnt. Und nach meiner Einschätzung wird auch der Westen diesen Krieg verlieren.
Also die NATO wird in der Ukraine verlieren. Deine
politisch,
Aussage?
Wirtschaftlich, militärisch und moralisch. Was ich kenne.
Aber das, sorry, dass ich dich unterbreche, das ist eine dramatischere Niederlage als in Afghanistan.
Ja, unbedingt. Der Ukraine-Krieg wird zum Katalysator des Niedergangs des Westens und der Auflösung der Vereinigten Staaten als Hegemonialmacht.
In the first week of 2025, Russian activity decreased on nearly all fronts, with clashes dropping by 20% to 950. The Pokrovsk and Toretsk sectors, as well as the Kursk region, where the Ukrainian armed forces launched a new offensive, were, however, least affected by this trend. At the end of December, however, the situation on the Kursk front became critical for the Ukrainian armed forces. Russian forces advanced from all directions, focusing particularly on cutting the front line near Malaya Loknya and reaching the southeastern outskirts of Sucha. Under these conditions, the options were either to further shorten the front line and gradually retreat south into Ukraine, or launch counterattacks to stabilize the situation temporarily. Before the renewed Ukrainian offensive, the Ukrainian armed forces had struck command posts and bases of Russian troops in Lvov, Rilsk, Ivanovsky, and during the current offensive, they continued hitting targets in Kursk and Malaya. Additionally, just before the offensive, Ukrainian forces employed new technology using electronic warfare to neutralize all Russian drones within a 10-kilometer radius, except those using fiber optic connections. Details and results of the offensive remain unclear based on Ukrainian sources, as they claim it is still ongoing. Notably, however, is the fact that the Ukrainian armed forces have used only minimal reserves, leaving room, they claim, to extend maneuver warfare to other currently quieter sections of the front. The sharp activation of Ukrainian troops in the Kursk region, however, is taking place against the backdrop of the ongoing offensive of the Russian army in the Donbas region, and statements about its recent capture of the city of Kurakhove, once an important stronghold of the armed forces of Ukraine, south of Pokrovsk. So what could be the reason for the decision of the Ukrainian command to throw its reserves not to repel the Russian onslaught in the east, but in a completely different direction? This remains a question that no one, besides perhaps Zelensky and the Ukrainian High Command, could know. Over the past few weeks, the Russian military public has reported on the transfer of Ukrainian units to the northern direction and the possible preparation of another offensive, although different versions of the direction of a new strike were put forward. With the beginning of the Ukrainian operation in Kursk, the command of the armed forces of Ukraine introduced a regime of information silence, demanding that the Ukrainian media comply with it. But even according to the official reports of the Ukrainian General Staff, the scale of what is happening there is noticeable. In quotations, there are currently 42 military clashes in the Kursk region, says their summary for January 5th. At the same time, according to the Ukrainian Military Department, there were 36 clashes in a day on the Pokrovsk section of the front, which was still considered the hottest. Attention is also drawn to the trip of the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Alexander Syrsky, to the Kursk region on the first day of the new year, as well as the urgent arrival in Kursk on January 5th of Russian Deputy Defense Minister Yunus Ekirov. Yehor Fursov, a serviceman with the Ukraine's 109th Battalion, has an interesting take, which is similar to what I expressed in my analysis that is now available for channel members alone. And here's what Mr. Fursov says, in quotations, "I believe that the war will not end anytime soon because it is not in the Russian interest. The Russian enemy is dragging out time, and all these tasks are just distractions." So for those of you who are interested, I invite you to watch my 18-minute analysis entitled "Russia and Iran are engaging in a long but managed war of attrition against America's proxies." In that video, I make the same point that Mr. Fursov is making here, i.e., that Russia is dragging out this war on purpose. So today's video is really my first official frontline update for 2025. We will be covering the Kursk, Toretsk, Kurakhove, and Pokrovsk sectors in that order. Toretsk, which is a front I do not normally cover, is included because it appears to be close to collapse for the Ukrainian armed forces. Lastly, my first WIPS logo merch has finally arrived. Now it's a bit snug for me, so for those of you who are over 6 feet tall like me, you might want to consider buying a large size instead of a medium like this. Now don't forget to join the membership channel community and leave a little love with a super thanks donation, and let's get into it.
Разжиряй нас. Не получится. Морковка лежит.
In Kursk, it can now be confirmed that the Ukrainian paratroopers launched attacks in at least 3 directions. One key strike targeted Bolshoye Soldatskoye on the Sudzha-Kursk highway, with fighting reported near Budin and Rozgrebly villages, where the Ukrainian armed forces advanced 4 to 5 kilometers. Another offensive was directed between Roskaya Konopelka and Cherkasskaya Konopelka, aiming to encircle and destroy part of the Russian forces. A third attack targeted Lyubimovka. Meanwhile, however, the Russian forces continued their advance on Sudzha, attacking Makhnovka, just 3 kilometers from the city. They also attempted to storm Viktorovka near Malaya Loknya, but Ukrainian forces repelled the assault. Additionally, Russian troops are trying to attack Vedlikovo to cut off part of Ukraine's contingent from the Ukrainian border and its logistics. In the first days of January, Russian forces launched a large-scale offensive on Toretsk. They managed to fully capture the central mine and its slag heaps, and also launched an attack on the last unoccupied northwestern part of the city. Within a few days, half of the district fell into a grey zone, with only the outskirts and the southern part of the Zabalka district remaining under full Ukrainian control. Russia now controls more than 70% of the city, and heavy fighting is ongoing for the remaining 20%. Additionally, Russian troops advanced in Nelipivka, took control and began their attack on Leonidivka. On the northern outskirts of Toretsk, Russian troops have approached the settlements of Dachny and Krymisky. The full capture of Toretsk will open the way for Russian forces not only to Konstantinivka and Chasiv Yar, but also for a northern bypass of Pokrovsk and cutting off part of the important logistical routes. However, the Ukrainian command does not expect a complete occupation of the city soon. Battles for its ruins are likely to continue for some time, they say. Now, from a Russian perspective, the first significant military event of 2025 was the capture of the city of Kurakhove. The Russian Ministry of Defense officially reported on the successful clearing of the western outskirts of the territory of the local power plant, adding that about 12,000 Ukrainian militants and 3,000 units of armored vehicles and heavy weapons, including 40 tanks, were destroyed during the fighting. For their courage and heroism, 5,500 of the Russian servicemen were presented with state and departmental awards. Now it should be noted, as I will show you later on, that the Ukrainian command continues to dispute the official Russian capture of Kurakhove. Persistent battles for one of the most populous cities in the west of the Donetsk People's Republic were fought for 115 days, and throughout this time, the media's attention was paid not only to the military tactical, but also to the energy aspect of the operation. This is because one of the largest thermal power plants in Donbass is located in Kurakhove. The armed forces of Ukraine desperately clung to its buildings until the last. As an appetizer to today's analysis, it should be mentioned that 3 days before the capture of Kurakhove, the nearby village of Shevchenko came under the control of Russian troops. RIA Novosti, which is Russian media, reports that Shevchenko is a tiny village near which Soviet geologists discovered a large lithium deposit in the early 80s of the last century. Its forecasted reserves, according to the calculated geophysical model, are estimated at 13.8 million tons of containing ore. It is necessary to emphasize that we are talking about forecasted and not proven reserves. Moreover, the geology of the ore field in Shevchenko is complex, and the notorious lithium is hidden in the thickness of granite massifs, which makes the mine extraction quite difficult. Russian media states that in Kiev, no one bothers with such trifles, and therefore there is a rather sour mood on Bankova because Shevchenko's lithium was part of Zelensky's package offer, the essence of which was reduced to the formula Ukrainian minerals in exchange for American weapons. But let's get back to the main course. The liberation of Kurakhove, according to Russian sources, and in particular the establishment of control over the local power plant, was associated with a further offensive on Pokrovsk on the very first day of fighting. It should be noted that Ukrainian resources predicted the loss of Kurakhove back in the spring of 2024, that is, almost a year ago. This is reported by Russian media RIA Novosti. Emphasis was placed on the fact that without Kurakhove electricity, there will be no Pokrovsk, and without it, Ukraine will receive minus 8 million tons of coking coal, with a total production of 24 million tons per year. Therefore, there is nothing surprising in the fact that the owner of the mine management and part-time, the largest steel producer in Ukraine, Metinvest, continued the shaft of the mine number 3 until the last opportunity. Officially, coal mining is stopped only in mid-December, when the front was already literally on the threshold of collapse. However, despite the claims from Russian leadership, some Ukrainian media maintains that Russian forces are yet to fully occupy Kurakhove. Ukraine's general staff assures that defensive forces still hold some positions in the city. However, they admit that a full withdrawal from Kurakhove is imminent if it has not occurred already. Current fighting is allowing Ukrainian troops to retreat to more advantageous positions, they say. The Russian advance in Kurakhove became possible after they captured the village of Dalny, or Dali, and used it to break through to the city's southwestern outskirts. On this section of the front, Russian troops quickly seized the territory between Kurakhove and Konstantinopolsky, but further progress westward remained stalled as long as Kurakhove continues to hold the line. On the southern flank of the Kurakhove salient, after withdrawing from Ospenivka, Ukrainian forces continued to hold the front line along the Suky Yali River. Russian forces are attacking in 2 directions, toward the village of Yantani to access the road to Dachny, and toward the Kurakhove-Zaporizhia highway. Here they aim to cut off the route somewhere between the villages of Yukalki and Constantinople. To achieve this, they have crossed the river at Zelenivka. If successful, the entire Kurakhove group will not only be completely cut off from logistics, but also effectively encircled. Russian troops are now just 3 kilometers away from the highway. Meanwhile in Pokrovsk, Russia currently has about a 2-fold numerical advantage at the front. This was stated in an interview with journalist Nikolai Feldman by ex-advisor to the office of the President of Ukraine, the infamous Alexei Arestovich. According to Mr. Arestovich's calculations, more than half of the servicemen of the armed forces of Ukraine, out of the 850,000 declared by the Ministry of Defense, are missing on the front line. In quotations, there are about 850,000 in the armed forces of Ukraine, according to the statements of our speakers at the Ministry of Defense. Of these, about 120,000 people who voluntarily left the unit, according to statements of our people's deputies. About 100,000 remain in hospitals, wounded, recovering, and so on. About another 100,000 on the borders with Belarus and Transnistria. Somewhere, 150,000 troops are already part of the brigades that are at the front. They, however, refuse to carry out combat missions, but they don't run. They stay, they get full pleasure, but they don't fight, according to Mr. Arestovich. And about 150,000, about a third, are limited use, he says. They are in the composition, but cannot perform complex combat missions. Then he says there are about 15,000 border guards fighting, Aristovich listed. As a result, 315,000 people remain, he noted. The whole story is now at war with the 650,000 grouping of the Russian Federation. Here's the answer to why 600,000 Russians have a general advantage all the time and in specific areas compared to 900,000 Ukrainian troops. So some of this may have been confusing based on the translation, but in essence, the rest of it says there are only 315,000 Ukrainians who are capable of fighting against 650,000 Russians. And that is why, he says, the Russians are advancing because they have a 2-to-1 troop advantage. Now in July, Russian forces were halted at Vozdvizhenka, located 6 kilometers from the Pokrovsk-Konstantinivka highway. Afterward, they spent 6 months organizing a sudden pincer maneuver to encircle the city. This pincer is now nearly complete. In late December and early January, Russian forces resumed intense attacks on Vozdvizhenka, capturing the village and expanding the gray zone by 3 kilometers toward the highway. Additionally, Russian forces began forming flanks, attacking Ukrainian positions in Baranivka from the north and in Yelisavetica from the south. Fierce battles are currently ongoing in both villages. South of Pokrovsk, the invading Russian troops are attempting to align the front line and prepare advantageous positions for an assault on the city. Heavy fighting is ongoing in Lysivka, Dashensky, and Zeliny, where the Ukrainian armed forces still hold their ground. The Russians have not managed to break through north of Shevchenko or capture Pishani. However, Russian forces are making progress in bypassing Pishani toward one of the main roads to Pokrovsk, coming within less than 1 kilometer of cutting this artery near the village of Kotlyne. Russian forces are likely to try moving further north to completely sever Pokrovsk's logistics. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian defense forces are mounting most of their counterattacks on this section of the front.